Good morning. It is good, so good to be together. I will welcome all those who are joining us online whenever and wherever and however you're doing so. And for those who are coming in from the service and making your way through the line for the Blessed Sacrament, that is caffeination, fear not, there is satisfaction ahead. This is a day that we anxiously look forward to every year as the commencement of our Lenten lecture series. And this year, we are traveling along week by week under a theme of belonging in a divided age. So as we settle into our Lenten season, which is part of what we are up to on a first Sunday in Lent, we find ourselves gathered here this morning in the heart of downtown Houston, a city of incredible proximity, yet one that, like the rest of our world, can often feel the strains of deep fragmentation. And that is what is leading us into this theme of belonging in a divided age. We were created by God to live in a web of deeply interrelated relationships, to God, to one another, and to the non-human world. However, we do find ourselves in an increasingly divided and isolated age where for many belonging is either elusive or irrelevant. This Lent, we will be joined by scholars, artists, and ministers who will reflect on the importance of belonging for our lives and offer tools and practices to help us cultivate the deep relationships that we were and have been made for. To open this conversation this morning, we couldn't have a more fitting guide. For our first guest is someone who has spent his life standing in in-between places. Pádraig Ó Tuama is a poet, a theologian, and a world-renowned conflict mediator. Whether he is hosting Poetry Unbound or working with communities and beyond, he approaches the world with a rare blend of linguistic precision and deep empathy. He understands that belonging isn't a state of permanent agreement, it's an ongoing practice of showing up. And so we're delighted that he is here to help us find the words we've lost, perhaps, and a few new ones to help us bridge the distance that may have come between us and our neighbors. It is a true delight to welcome Pádraig to our cathedral. On this, we learned yesterday his very first visit to our fair city. Welcome, Pádraig Ó Tuama.
Thank you very much. It's lovely to be with you online and in person. I have had a lovely time so far in this trip to the People's Republic of Texas. You laugh, but you also know it's true. The idea of belonging has been used a lot, throughout our whole lives and throughout the life of the conscious-speaking human community. And it is worthwhile looking at with a mixture of affection and criticism, and we're going to do that this morning. A few years ago, I was wanting to buy a watch in New York City, a Swatch watch, and I went into the shop to purchase a Swatch watch, and I got the watch, nice and simple, and the guy said to me, "Do you want to come to a Swatch watch party on Thursday?" And I said, "Hell no." And what happens at a Swatch watch party? And he said, "Well, everybody there is wearing Swatch watches." And I was like, And he said, "We just experienced what it means to belong to the Swatch watch community." I was like, that sounds terrible. I kind of wish I had gone, because I'm sure I could have told you even funnier stories about how terrible it was, but I had other things to do on that Thursday night other than waste my time at a Swatch watch party. My guess is that the really nice guy had been told, you have to say this to everybody who makes a purchase, and we're going to send somebody in to check that you're doing that. So I didn't blame him. I blamed the marketing person who was telling him what to do. Selling belonging, that's what was happening. If you look at ads on the television for a fancy car, for instance, regularly they're not selling you a fancy car. They're selling you the idea that it's you who'll be in the fancy car. They're selling you your own belonging back to yourself. And they're telling you, people will see you in this car and they will think something about you. They're selling you the kind of belonging you'll occupy in other people's imagination of you also. And this is a powerful piece of manipulation. Of course, you might need a car, you might need a watch. I'm not saying, we can't step outside of these things, all of them. But there's big questions to be asked about the ways within which the human desire to belong is a powerful one, and that the human desire to belong can be manipulated by people who want to make profit out of it, or other kinds of power. I worked for a long time in all kinds of conflict mediation situations, and I've never met somebody who belonged to a paramilitary organization or to a state armed body that was being held accountable for murder who didn't feel a sense of belonging with their fellows. And people would say, if you belong to this paramilitary organization or this gang or this troop or this outfit, well then, you'll feel like you've got brothers and we'll belong to each other. We'll have each other's back. And sometimes the cost of belonging is very high because it might mean to say, and here therefore are the secrets you'll need to keep as part of belonging to this group. Don't question authority, or don't ever imply that there is something inside of us that needs to be queried. That can be a cost of belonging. You know what that's like. I am a very bad Catholic, but when you look at what it means to belong to the Catholic Church for the popes, there is this cost of belonging to say, and speaking from the chair of Peter, we have never deviated from each other along the long lines of papal succession. That's the most extraordinary, not the most, but it's one of the extraordinary costs of belonging to that role. These demands for belonging can happen in all kinds of ways, as well as there's other experiences of belonging you've had, where it might be that you move to a place and people speak to you and you suddenly feel like, wow, I've felt this great sense of belonging here. Some groups are really easy to join, but almost impossible to leave. And that's worthwhile looking at. What are the processes of joining or leaving a group like? Who polices the borders of belonging? Who's in charge of those? And whose job is it to decide who it is that is kicked out? Sometimes when I've joined groups, very quickly you begin to feel a lovely sense of belonging, but there might be just a continued refrain of, well, that person was once one of us, but not anymore. And that person was with us for 25 years, not anymore. That person was with us for 2.5 years, not anymore. These quick questions as measuring the idea of those who are not with us any longer with really easily accessed ideas about longevity of time. That's a worrisome way of measuring it, because we all have multiple belongings. You belong to a family, whether you like them or not. You might belong to a neighbourhood street, or to a parish, or to multiple parishes. You belong to yourself sometimes. You belong to a workplace. You belong to a sports group perhaps. You belong to a social justice action group. You belong to a group of people who are protesting. You belong to the group of people who are on the bus right now. You belong to this group, right here, right now, simply by being in this room or being online. Belonging is happening in all kinds of ways, at all kinds of periods. And the question for me is, who is it that's determining what the cost of that belonging is and the benefits? And how is it that people who aren't in this belonging, how is it that they're being spoken of? Do we have an imagination that it's kind of amazing that people who don't belong to us can be virtuous? I've heard that from Christian people. I've also heard it from psychologists saying, it's amazing that this person hasn't been to therapy, but yet they're doing very well. I mean, therapy is only one good way to go about living an integrated life. There's also other fine ways to live an integrated life. But I've heard other people say, it's fascinating, that my neighbour, who is not a believer in God, could be such a generous person. Why would that be fascinating? Generosity happens in all kinds of ways. And that is a way within which there can be all kinds of conscious and unconscious borderlands of belonging, because you can expect some things from people who you think belong to the same group as you, and you might be surprised from other things from people who you'd think do not belong to the same belonging group as you. And it might be sometimes that you expect less from people outside and more from people inside. And one of the costs of that belonging can, unfortunately, be that therefore you can be determined to turn ignorance towards people in your own group who might be violating actions. Because if you were to begin to say, people in our group are doing terrible things, well, then you'd think, what kind of a group do I belong to? I like the group, or I like belonging, or I like feeling like I belong. Belonging is a beautiful thing, and it needs to be considered and tuned like an instrument carefully. And the languages of belonging, who's in, who's out, who watches the border, who decides, those are things that we must, around our kitchen tables, in our conversations, pay a lot of attention to in ordinary ways and to do it easily. So that's what I'm going to talk a little bit about today. And I'm sure you'll hear all kinds of things about belonging over the next while. We're going to look at a text from Mark's Gospel. There's some here. I think we just did kind of one for maybe every two. So if you don't have one, it's fine. Just look at your neighbors, share it, provided they're happy to share. It's only these two columns, but it's a slightly lengthy piece. For those watching online, I'll tell you, it's Mark chapter 9, verse 2 to verse 29. I'll read it. 6 days later, Jesus took with him Peter and James and John and led them up a high mountain apart by themselves. And he was transfigured before them, and his clothes became dazzling white, such as no one on earth could bleach them. And there appeared to them Elijah with Moses, who were talking with Jesus. Then Peter said to Jesus, "Rabbi, it is good for us to be here. Let us make 3 dwellings, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah." He did not know what to say, for they were terrified. Then a cloud overshadowed them, and from the cloud there came a voice. "This is my son, the beloved. Listen to him." Suddenly, when they looked around, they saw no one with them anymore, but only Jesus. As they were coming down the mountain, he ordered them to tell no one about what they had seen until after the Son of Man had risen from the dead. So they kept the matter to themselves, questioning what this rising from the dead could mean. Then they asked him, "Why do the scribes say that Elijah must come first?" He said to them, Elijah is indeed coming first to restore all things. How then is it written about the Son of Man that he is to go through many sufferings and be treated with contempt? But I tell you that Elijah has come, and they did to him whatever they pleased, as it is written about him. When they came to the disciples, they saw a great crowd around them, and some scribes arguing with them. When the whole crowd saw them, they were immediately overcome with awe, and they ran forward to greet him. He asked them, "What are you arguing about with them?" Someone from the crowd answered him, "Teacher, I brought you my son. He has a spirit that makes him unable to speak, and whenever it seizes him, it dashes him down, and he foams and grinds his teeth and becomes rigid. And I asked your disciples to cast it out, but they could not do so." He answered them, "You faithless generation, how much longer must I be among you? How much longer must I put up with you? Bring him to me." And they brought the boy to him. When the spirit saw him, immediately it convulsed the boy, and he fell on the ground and rolled about, foaming at the mouth. Jesus asked the father, "How long has this been happening to him?" And he said, "From childhood. It has often cast him into the fire and into the water to destroy him. But if you are able to do anything, have pity on us and help us." Jesus said to him, "If you are able, all things can be done for the one who believes." Immediately the father of the child cried out, "I believe, help my unbelief." When Jesus saw that a crowd came running together, he rebuked the unclean spirit, saying to it, "You spirit that keeps this boy from speaking and hearing, I command you, come out of him and never enter him again." After crying out and convulsing him terribly, it came out, and the boy was like a corpse, so that most of them said, "He's dead." But Jesus took him by the hand and lifted him up, and he was able to stand. When he had entered the house, his disciples asked him privately, "Why could we not cast it out?" He said to them, "This kind can only come out through prayer." So, this is a kind of a mad dash through lots of events, some of which you might like, some of which you might find offensive. I'm with you in all of those things. It is very typically a text from the Gospel of Mark, because Mark is very interested in action, event, suddenly this, and then. You're kind of overwhelmed by it. If you ever have the opportunity, just look up online to see somebody doing a recitation from memory of the Gospel of Mark. Lots of actors have done it, because it lends itself so much to a public recitation. People have memorized the 16 chapters, and you really get a sense of the oral event of Mark's Gospel. And Mark's Gospel is completely stitched together with little indentations of time, typically urgent time, and then, suddenly, and then, immediately, and then, and another thing. So it's kind of exhausting. I also think that somebody, and maybe you good people of Texas here can enlighten us, has completely missed a trick by not labeling some clothes washing detergent as transfiguration and using the following line: "And his clothes became dazzling white, such as no one on earth could bleach them." It feels like product placement in this text. I've always found this very funny, that particular piece of information about the capacity of the transfiguration to get your dazzling whites whiter. So there are many things we could look at in this text, but I want to look at this text through the lens of some questions regarding belonging. And I'm going to be critical about most of the people in the text, except the father of the boy, because I think he's a really interesting intervention. First of all, we see that there are followers, and Jesus has a subgroup within the followers, Peter and James and John. You see that in other formulations. And one wonders, what's it like to be in a group where there's an in-group within the group? You know what that's like. You've felt like that. Sometimes you've been in the in-group. Sometimes you've not. Sometimes you haven't wanted to be. Sometimes you have wanted to be. Sometimes you're the one making the in-group. Sometimes you're the one refusing to join the in-group. I don't think there's any conclusion about that other than to say this is a dynamic that happens over and over again in all groups, in a family, in a group of friends, in a neighborhood. And sometimes people will say, oh, there's a clique within the clique. And sometimes that's true, but other times people are so uncomfortable in groups that they are quick to make an accusation of that because they don't know what else to do. They're powerful dynamics to know. Sometimes I believe it, sometimes I don't. I know at times I've thought, oh, look, clearly in the poetry world there's a clique within the clique. And then people say to me, well, you're in a clique of the poetry world. And I feel like, really? Am I? Nobody's told me. And so I sometimes feel like there's a sense of alienation we have. And it's easier to say, well, somebody has deliberately excluded me, than to say, I feel alienated from myself. And there's an invitation to the question to ask that. And other times there are people, absolutely, structurally, systematically, politically, as well as locally, who are 100% making in-groups and out-groups. The question is to figure out how do we live across all of those. So that's one of the interesting things to notice here. And then there's this interesting sense that in whatever supernatural thing is being described in the Transfiguration, where these other two mountain dwellers, Elijah and Moses, each of whom is also associated with a mountain in the story of their life, appear to them. That there is some kind of way where the character of Jesus of Nazareth is being cast into a mythological belonging with these other characters, and perhaps has a deep, what you might call literary or perhaps mystical or something in between connection with these characters whom he did not know, but whom he does know, and from whom he gets comfort. That there can be belongings to people from historical contexts too. And those can be very powerful and very true. I think about Ignatius every day. I never met him. He died 400 years ago. But I think about him every day with gratitude and a sense that were I to meet him, that I would say, well, hello, Ignatius. We've been talking for a long time. He might call the police. This interesting thing happens. They're up there, they're terrified, they're confused, they're seeing things that are incomprehensible to see. And Peter says, Rabbi, it is good for us to be here. Let us make 3 dwellings, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah. He doesn't make dwellings for himself and the other boys, but anyway, he doesn't propose that. But one of the things that we can think about this is that in a mountaintop experience, there can be a desire to say, I want to belong to this. Let's remain here. Let us dwell here. Let us stay in this place. And you know what that's like. There's a group of people and you have a lovely connection with each other and you think it will always be the group of people. Nothing will happen. Nobody will get divorced. Nobody will die. Nobody will move away. No change will occur. Nobody new will try to join us because we've had this beautiful experience. Let us make 12 dwellings and live here forever and nothing will change. And it does, of course. Time happens. Some new person comes into the group. Somebody moves away. You discover that somebody has other friendships that are just as important to them as these friendships. And you realize that you're coming down from the elevated experience. The elevated experience was not empty. It was powerful. The question is what's its relationship to other things that are occurring, rather than thinking of it as the solitary thing. I have such sympathy for Peter. I too have been in moments when something has happened like it's at the top of a mountain and you think, this is the way it needs to be for always and forever. This is how a friendship is made. This is how a relationship is built. This is how a neighborhood community comes together. This is how a social justice group should work. And we will always do this and we will never make the mistake. And we will always have this sense of belonging with each other. And it falls apart. And it doesn't mean that what happened was invalid. It just means that other things happen too. So there's a sense of the temporary and the mutable experience of belonging. That doesn't mean the belonging that wasn't positive or powerful. It just means that there can be a desire for permanence that can sometimes get in the way of belonging. I'm going to skip over lots of the other stuff because there's, the references to Elijah and trying to understand what's going on. Those are different questions that are occurring in the Gospel of Mark, in this early gospel that we have. There's something so interesting, though, about seeing this character of Jesus when they come down and there's scribes and there's this question as to why they haven't been able to heal this boy and his distressed father, who clearly is desperate and is filled with the desire to find out anything that's going to work. And the frustration of Jesus, you faithless generation, how much longer must I be among you? How much longer must I put up with you? Bring him to me. He does not sound like gentle Jesus, meek and mild here. We don't often see statues or images of this kind of, I think, irritable character of the gospel, and he seems like that here. And that irritation, and I would go further to say a certain kind of ideological obtuseness continues, because he asks this seemingly pastoral question, how long has it been going on? And the father says, from childhood it has often cast him into the fire and into the water to destroy him, but if you are able to do anything, have pity on us and help us. And instead of any kind of response to, oh God, how awful, Jesus picks up on the conditional, if you are able. How fascinating. And his retort to him, if you are able, all things can be done for the one who believes. What's fascinating then about the response of the Father is there is Father's sense of, oh God, I believe, help my unbelief. What an extraordinary response. I believe, help my unbelief. He's saying, look, whatever magic you need me to have, whatever ideology you need me to step into, whatever is going on, stop being so irritable. My son is ill. I'm trying to help him. This thing casts him into the fire. This thing casts him into the water. I'll do anything. The Father's belief is in his love for his son. This, I think, is an image of extraordinary belonging here. And that son will grow up, provided he lives. And what we see is the Father's absolute dedication to that son. And in the face of that, Jesus himself comes down off his high mountain, because in a certain sense, he's still stuck there. He's had a belonging to a kind of ideology of this experience. Do you believe? Do you this? Do you that? And his drama is his drama. And he's being brought into the drama of this father in front of him who's saying, this is what's happening for me. My son is ill. And it takes a while for Jesus to shake off whatever it is that has led to him, I think, being so caught up in his vocational understanding of himself, whatever that is in the Gospel of Mark, in order for him to be his usual self, which is quite typically, not always, but quite typically, completely open and present to people who are in need coming to him in desperation. He's interrupted a lot, and often he's difficult. And if people come to him with performances, they usually seem to get the sharp end of his tongue, but regularly the interruptions where somebody has come where they are in touch with their own need, there's an immediate outpouring of, oh, there's a connection, but not here. And I think it's a salutary text for all of us to think, what is it that captures your imagination that can mean that you can sometimes be ignorant to the pleading heart of somebody right in front of you, and that is being called out of you, and that we need to sometimes take off whatever ideological or group belonging that we have, or whatever point we are trying to make, in order to find out what does it mean to be present right here to the individual in front of me who has demonstrated the kind of virtue in life, in time, in action, that in a certain sense Jesus would at other times have pointed to. I think it's a brave text to have included in the gospel. I'm in a church, so I'm not going to swear and say the usual kind of things I say about the depiction of Jesus of Nazareth's character here, because he's being annoying. And I appreciate us having the opportunity to look at a text where somebody who's being depicted as someone to follow is being shown at how difficult it can be to have multiple belongings, and how complicated it can be where your belongings seem to come into clash with each other, where he here is so belonging to the mountaintop and his purpose and his vision that he can't see what's right in front of him. Somebody who's absolutely desperate, and somebody where he was picking up on the if rather than all of the other data that this poor father was giving to him. I admire the father so much. I think he is an extraordinary character. And in the midst of it all, so possessed by the capacity of language. I believe. Help my unbelief. If you want to make an erasure poem of that, you could also say, I believe my unbelief. I do too. I believe yours also. I believe, help my unbelief. All of these things are possible in this. I believe is conjugated as a verb in the Greek of this text, but unbelief is conjugated as a noun, my unbelief. Can we make a verb of that? I unbelieve. Is there belonging for there too? I know there is. Every single place that has people who believe also has those same people who unbelieve, because that is the process of it all. In some, I'm not involved in church, but I am at the edges of it an enormous amount. And I've seen some people say, let's create belonging, and then people can believe, and then they can behave. And that just seems like a recruitment strategy for a really, really bad club. Because the implication is I know what you need to believe, and I know how you need to behave, and I will manipulate you into a false sense of belonging in order for me to cajole and coerce you into some type of behavior that I have predetermined is appropriate for you. When on earth do you find that to be fruitful in any kind of group? And the texts of religion show that it is always the irritating, confusing, confounding stranger at the edge who comes in and shocks people with what it is that they know, even though they don't belong. Ruth, for instance, she comes like a judge of God, like the voice of God, not coming from the top of the mountain, but wandering as a displaced, widowed, exile Moabite here at the borders of belonging into a town and says, hello, I'm going to help you be more like you. I don't need your pity. I need my rights. Extraordinary. She did not belong, behave, whatever the other one is, believe. I think such recruitment strategies of group belonging are always going to have many victims, even if they sound cool, or even if some consultant or some evangelist has helped people think it through. Meeting each other at our point of need and not being obtuse to each other in the communication of need is one of the important things. And what does that require? An open heart. A continuing open heart. An open heart. Belonging is temporary. It will always change. And that's part of its absolute delight. And to find a way to own the absolute delight of that is to enjoy the delight of it. It's challenging because it's creative. It's making itself and growing, and all growth is complicated. Every family was made by a family breaking or a family expanding. You know what that's like. And it can be painful at the time, but it's powerful too. It can cause you to give authority to an ideology that will not serve you if you are not able to be critical of the belonging that promises you something. Whatever belonging promises you, it also asks of you. It extracts. And the question for you is, are you safe and free enough to ask a question? If you're not, it's a pretty dangerous kind of belonging. And we know what forms of belonging that have been ideologically motivated like that, such as to ban questions, have done throughout the history of the last 100 years. And that's a recent part of history. Loyalties and jealousies and desires and feeling left out are always going to be part of belonging. And to find a tenderness, to make space for those, to know that they're happening, to know that you can never prevent all of them because some of them are part of the human condition, and to find a way to stitch together the yearnings that we have to belong, the yearnings that we have to be seen. All of those things are necessary. Deep love can be held in belonging. I think of that father and his son. I think of his capacity in language and his capacity in action to do and do and do everything he was able. How many other messiahs had he wandered up to? What other brutal language had he faced? Where did he learn his capacity to speak his mind, and to speak his mind vulnerably, to speak his heart in the face of obtuse ideology? What a man. I admire him so much. Belonging can be a home of generosity, and belonging can be a home of protection. And in the context of that, it is always responsive, and it is always open to the change and seeking a way for the love that we have to continue to change and to be present to each other, rather than trying to build dwellings on the top of mountains that are going to preserve in a frozen moment some God we thought we could see, even though even then we were confused. Let's take some questions.
I'm going to be one of those people that kind of creates fiction. Did you bring any of your poetry to read some things to us?
I'm going to finish off with a poem, yeah.
Okay, that's my question.
Were you hoping for poetry rather than talking about belonging?
Well, yeah, I'd like to hear.
As you've been talking about, we know that belonging is a really powerful force. And as a conflict mediator, I'm curious kind of what your thoughts are on when we see those forces acting on the people around us in a way that we recognize are harmful to themselves and to others. How do you bring that up to them? How do you try to address that?
Yeah. I mean, it won't be irritating to you probably, but it always depends on the circumstance and what your capacity is, what the threat to you and to others is, what the opportunities are, and what the history of that group is. Often, I suppose, I'm particularly interested in the moment and thinking, who is it that might be being excluded, and how is it that a connection can be made with them? That's one thing. And then that might be in gesture, a useful intervention to show, look, what's possible. We don't need to create belonging by virtue of exclusion. That might be one thing to think of that's appropriate in the moment. Maybe that person doesn't want that attention, though. Or other times, if you know the person who might be, or if it's you who might be being the one who's creating an exclusion, like if somebody's able to say, hey, I like that person, let's include them. That kind of, it's a challenge, and it's an intervention that can be helpful. Sometimes it might need to be toned up a little bit in terms of, hey, stop being an idiot. Or listen to the restraint of my Irishness. But somebody might say something that sounds more harsh. Aggression, that's what that would be. And aggression is no bad thing, or it doesn't have to be a bad thing. We all live with all kinds of aggression. Aggression can be helpful, but it's hard to turn the volume down on it. So typically, if I have time to think, I try to think, well, how can I take one step up of asserting something, rather than taking 10 steps up, because I might have been wrong. Maybe there was a joke going on and I misunderstood it, or etc. So finding a way to try to do something can be helpful. Yeah.
Thank you. I'm struck by your comments today about how in this culture at this time, we seem to have very little language to talk about belonging that doesn't turn into language about moralizing or aggression. Or I'm just really struck as how adults, even if I look at my own experience, the vulnerability involved with talking about I'm having a sense of not belonging, we really don't have like a place for that. And I'm wondering if when you've gone through the process of conflict mediation with individuals or groups, does it change their language about how they're able to express this?
Well, I think one of the things that can help, one of the things that conflict does is it isolates, and it creates all kinds of fracturing where you can feel like you're an island by yourself. And one of the truths is that you are. It isn't to say, no, here's the belonging, here it is, here's the certitude. Everything's temporary, and we will all die. And that's complicated to know how to live with, and we're all looking for systems to turn away from that. And so one of the things I hope is that in conflict resolution there can be some form of self-reckoning enough where you feel like the quality of my belonging to myself will influence the quality of my behavior and connection in a group, such that I might be able to resist when my group is being violent, or at least ask a question when I think my group is rising in escalation, in hostility. And so that is one of the things you're hoping for, is for the group to splinter a little bit. Not because I want all groups to not exist, but all groups have the capacity, especially if they deny that they're going to change, they have the capacity to be vehicles of hostility. Yeah.
Would you comment on group strategy as a profit-making model, which is so prevalent in the world today?
Yeah. I mean, it's what's being sold over and over again, isn't it? Belong to this group, join up to this online community, move to this community, move here. And I don't think that those things are necessarily bad. I just want to ask whose profit margin is being created. And for me, it's always the money to look at that. And I'm not an anti-capitalist in the sense of where I think, let's all live without money. But I suppose I want to think, is somebody getting phenomenally rich from this by preying upon the desires of individuals, or manipulating them, or selling something that's actually impossible to get? And so I'm not an ideologist regarding that, but I do think at least the questions can be asked regarding it. So.
This idea of belonging intrigues me in that Christ seems to be so opaque in his parables. And he tells people constantly, don't tell anybody about this. And he says repeatedly, I won't be with you, as though to keep everybody away from him.
Yeah.
And the letters of Paul tell us how disorganized and non-belonging the followers are subsequently.
Yeah.
So is this some sort of stumble we have to deal with and feel our way through the darkness to find?
Yeah. I like the way you say it. I think what it shows is how fragmented and stumbling all of our human organizations are going to be. And that we can create powerful senses with each other in the midst of our frailty. Nobody quite knows what Jesus thought of himself, because there's different versions of it across the 4 canonical Gospels, never mind the other ones. And certainly Mark's Gospel is characterized by him saying, here's something, don't tell anyone, which is an intriguing part. And they're like, what does that even mean? We don't even comprehend it enough to spill the beans to others, which you see in that little middle part that I didn't comment on. But I think what this shows is that there can often be stories of the past, whether that's the past of the 60s or the past of 2,000 years ago, where people say, and then this movement happened and they were all there. And people go, oh, wow, wouldn't it have been amazing to have been a member of that constituted group where everybody understood exactly what was going on. But at every point in human groups, it's probably been ragtag, and most of the storytelling happens in retrospect, and most of the clarity and stitching together happens in retrospect. And primarily what occurs in these moments, what we remember, is people of love and courage. And the courage goes in multiple directions. Courage to stand up against your detractors and oppressors, but also courage to challenge each other in order to grow more deeply into love. And the courage goes in both, and the courage to name your own frailty too. Those are multiple directions of courage in the face of group belonging. And I do think that courage, coming from the word for heart, core, courage is one of the fundamental aspects of belonging, because every group has the capacity to demonstrate the opposite of courage, which is heartlessness, in the name of putting something forward. I love belonging. I love the temporary belongings that I have. And I always need to ask the question about my own sectarianism within the context of that, and to be alert to that and to tune it like an instrument, knowing that you can never establish it perfectly and it doesn't need any future attention. Rather, it has to be tuned on a regular basis, like an instrument you play, like something you tend. I'll finish with a poem. I do think that in conflict resolution, the people who demonstrate the capacity to belong to their groups with courage have been the ones who have a sense of their own independence also, and are not frightened if the group says, we'll kick you out. Go, well, here's my question anyway. There's an old Irish tradition of saying a prayer to your own death. I translated some of those. They're from the 1700s, lots of those. And so this is my kind of response poem to such a thing. It's called How to Belong, but the word belong is crossed out. And it's retitled How to Be Alone, because I think the two are in connection. It all begins with knowing nothing lasts forever, so you might as well start packing now. In the meantime, practice being alive. There will be a party where you'll feel like nobody's paying you attention, and there will be a party where attention is all you'll get. What you need to do is to remember to talk to yourself between these parties. And again, there will be a day, a decade, when you won't fit in with your body, even though you're in the only body you're in. You need to control your habit of forgetting to breathe. Remember when you were younger and you practiced kissing on your arm? You were onto something then. Sometimes harm knows its own healing. Comfort knows its own intelligence. Kindness too, it needs no reason. There is a you telling you another story of you. Listen to her. Where do you feel anxiety in your body? The chest? The fist? The dream before waking? The head that feels like it's at the top of the swing? Or the clutch of gut, like falling and falling and falling and falling? It knows something. You're dying. Try to stay alive. For now, touch yourself. I'm serious. Touch yourself. Take your hand and place your hand someplace upon your body and listen to the community of madness that you are. You are such an interesting conversation. You belong here. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Pádraig, for opening our series so beautifully and profoundly. A couple of things to note. Next week, we'll be joined, our next guest will be the Reverend Matthew Ichihashi Potts, who is the Pusey minister at Harvard's Memorial Church, who is the author of a book on forgiveness, and we'll be exploring the relationship between forgiveness as an instrument and perhaps a challenge to belonging in a divided age. For those who have worshiped already, bless you as you go about your day. If you have not yet worshiped, we'll see you in church in just a few scant minutes. A reminder that evensong for our cracking open our season of Lent is this evening at 5 p.m. Go in peace to love and serve the Lord.